Hello everybody, welcome back to The Hobby Musician, and more specifically, welcome to the Workbench. We are in the middle of a guitar kit building mini-series, and if you want to get caught up on any of the episodes, or if you want to jump around and just see the episode that pertains to you, I'll put a link at the top to a playlist that has everything we've done. Today we are focusing on the body. You can see here I have the body of the guitar. We're building an Ibanez JEM kind of look-alike, so that's why you see the cutout grip here. And we're going to do two things in today's episode. Number one, we're going to prepare the body to get painted, and number two, we're going to paint the body. But it's very important to emphasize part one. Preparing a piece of wood to correctly and effectively take paint is a big deal. And regular viewers of the channel know that previously on our channel here, we have built other kit guitars. And one in particular, I just messed up the paint. I didn't prepare it. I didn't know what I was doing, and I made so many mistakes along the way. Now, after you watch this episode, I highly recommend, I'm going to put a link to it up here, but check out this episode where I talk about all the mistakes that I made and the lessons that I learned. Those lessons then led me to understand the correct way to get a guitar body ready for paint, which is what we're going to cover today. And for no other reason, the other benefit of watching this is you don't find on YouTube very many people who share with you and show you their mistakes. Typically, the only thing you see are the most perfect take or the most perfect outcome, so it might be refreshing. But all of that aside, what we're going to do to prepare this guitar body is we are going to use a grain filler. Now, if you know anything about wood, you know that even though you can sand it, you can get really fine sandpaper and sand it down so that to the skin or to your touch, it feels very smooth. Grain in wood is just on a microscopic level. That just means that there are pits and nooks and crannies all throughout the surface that will really show up if you use stains and paints and sealers, but even just right now in its wood state, you may not notice that it's there. That's why products exist to fill the grain. You can apply something on top of the wood, and we're going to use AquaCoat today. They're not a sponsor, it's just a product that a lot of people use. But this product is going to get pushed and flow into all of those nooks and crannies, so that when I come back and sand this product down, which is just on top of the wood, it's going to provide us a flat surface, no more nooks and crannies, and that flat surface is what we're going to put the paint onto. To just show you what I've done, now you can obviously see I've done something to this body already. Well, all I did was I took it out of the box, and you can see the blue tape. This is just painter's masking tape. I know, I like to think a couple steps ahead, and I know that I don't want any paint getting in this main cavity here, over here. This is the electronics cavity, and you can see there's blue down here, but that's only because of the back of the guitar. So this is these are two cavities that I don't want paint getting into. And since I don't want paint getting into them, I don't need to apply the wood grain filler. So that's why I've masked them off. Now you'll notice though on this particular model, because we're building in a JEM style guitar, these grooves down here, these grooves actually they're gonna see from different perspectives. Once the tremolo gets installed and fixed, there actually is, you're going to be able to see underneath the bottom of that tremolo. So these are going to need to take paint. So I left them unmasked. I'm going to use the wood grain filler, and we're going to paint them because that'll be visible when this is all done. The only other thing that I needed to do is this particular product is so easy to apply. You can just fold up a paper towel, which is what we're going to do today, dab it in here, and then just wipe it on. But the directions on AquaCoat do say that whatever surface you're applying it to, you're going to want to make sure that you've sanded it to at least 220 grit, or they say, or finer. So if you have 220 grit or finer sandpaper, you're going to want to take a pass on your surface, which I've already done. I've sanded down all of the curves and in this grip and everything to a little finer than 220 to prepare it to take this. And the other thing I have, brought this extra towel because what I want to do is I want to put the guitar body on something so that I can apply this product to the surface, and I want to go all the way around the edges so I can kind of get more done. Then I'm going to have to let that sit and dry before I flip it over and do the back. So that's what all is going on here. So to explain what else, just to get started with this process, as I mentioned, this is a grain filler that a lot of people use. It is popular for a couple of reasons. It's eco-friendly and it's water-based, and it has very, very low VOCs, volatile organic compounds. So that means it doesn't have a lot of odor, and you can, look, if you have a well-ventilated space, do this in a well-ventilated space, but you can do this indoors, unlike some other products you may find. So when you kind of open this, you look in here, even though it may look kind of white and opaque, it kind of looks like the jar of paste that you get at school, like when you're in elementary school. But you can open this up. As I said before, you really can just use some paper towels, fold it up into, kind of a small, thick square, something like this, and then you just pull up. We're going to pull up some of this material so that you got it on there, and then you just come and you start rubbing it onto the surface that you want to fill. And you can see here, I'll get a little bit rubbed in here, and I'm using circular motions. Wood grain, depending on the specific piece of wood you have, that grain can go any which direction. So if you just go in straight lines, you might not get it into all the places that you need it. And circular motions like this are really going to help kind of work it into all of this. Now I'll show you a little bit, and we get the light on it here. And you can see that you start to see the patterns. And so what I want to do is I want to keep working it. I'm moving it all over. And it gives you some good working time. The directions here say, depending on your humidity, your temperature, wherever you're working, it can take anywhere from a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe longer to dry. So you have some time to kind of get it worked everywhere you need to get it worked. And what you want to do is after you get the coat on there, you want to take just a quick pass. And if there's big buildups of the stuff, you want to get that off so that you don't have to sand down through a ton of stuff. So that is what I'm going to do. You can see that just these circular motions are getting it all over the surface, exactly what I want. So with that in mind, you kind of see how this is going to go. I'm going to switch over to a time lapse now, and you'll see me kind of finish off this, and then I'll come back, I'll do the back. And after you do that and you sand it down, you look at it, you inspect it. Do you need to do another coat? Is one coat enough? And those are the decisions we'll make after we get this first coat on. So I'm going to get back to work, and you'll see this kind of all happen really quick, and we'll be back in a second. All right, everybody, there you go. We are all set with the first part of this bodywork. You can see in the time lapse that I ended up doing 2 coats of the grain filler. And one of the things that's both kind of talked about in the directions here, as well as a common thread that you're going to see with a lot of people on YouTube who use this product, is that even though you put a single coat on, you've got to inspect it. So once the coat went on the front and the back and I let it set, everything was dry, I lightly sanded it back down, and it says 220 or finer. I ended up using 400 grit, but you just lightly sand it so that you can get kind of, the swirls, like when you're applying it, it'll kind of harden in some swirls and things like that. So you just lightly sand those down and then you look at it. So I took the body, and after kind of getting that light sand over the whole thing, I noticed that in some places it looked like I may have been a little too thin with the product. And when that happens, being water-based, it also has a tendency that this can also soak in a little bit. So the combination of a little bit too light and the natural soaking in meant that the first coat did a decent job, but it didn't get all of it. So that's what you saw in that little kind of break. I did the sanding and I inspected it and decided I needed to come back and do a second coat. So when I got the second coat on there, I just was a little more liberal, kind of got a little extra stuff on there, but still went through the same process, let it set, dry, about 45 minutes each side, came back and I did the next round of that 400 grit sandpaper. And I gotta tell you guys, after that second round, this thing is smooth. And what I can see is when the light hits it, you can kind of see that even though visually you see the grain, what you now see, you don't see the divots of the grain, I see the coloration of the grain, but along every single line, you see a shiny kind of a gleam or a glisten along it. And what that is there used to be a divot along that grain, but now this clear product has solidified and stuck in those low spots. So now we have a nice flat surface for our second part to do the paint job on this. So what we're gonna do for this episode, I'm actually gonna let this set just for my own peace of mind. I'm gonna let this set overnight so it can really firm up and really harden before we get to painting it. But I'm gonna get all this stuff switched around, and the next time I see you, we're gonna be ready for some paint. All right, hang tight. All right, everybody, it's actually been a couple of days since we finished the grain filling. I've had to wait for the weather to cooperate with us because we're gonna head outside to do the painting part. And I wanna talk through the tips and the methods that I'm gonna use inside, because once we get outside, the sound is terrible, so I'm gonna switch to time-lapse shots of me doing the actual painting. But to explain what we're gonna do, we're actually gonna use a very accessible, very easy to do method for anybody out there. We're gonna use truly just rattle can spray paint cans. You can see here I've got several different ones. We'll talk through that, but the methods that we're gonna use and the tips I'm gonna give you are gonna make it so that you can use something as basic and accessible as these spray paint cans and get a great paint job finish on your guitar. Now you see I have the three different ones here. Today I'm actually gonna put down a couple coats of this one, primer first, and then after I get just a couple light coats of primer, I'm gonna switch over to do a couple light coats of top coat. And the particular plan for this body is I want a pure Arctic white finish on this. So we got white primer, white top coat. Now you also notice I've got a clear glossy top coat, which I'm not going to use today. The top coat is going to go on after I get some decals on here. And so in a later episode, I'll show you how you can make your own custom decals and apply them. And it's after those decals go on, we'll come back and put that top coat over everything. So the first tip that I want to give you for if you're going to use spray cans to do this yourself is the actual method of application. Once you have your spray can, the best way to get an even coat is to always have the can in motion whenever paint is coming out. So the best way to do that, when I go outside, I'm going to suspend this. I'm actually going to hang this so it's suspended in air. And when I apply, let's say I'm applying, a pass to the front of this guitar, I am actually going to start moving the can. So I'm going to be off the can or off the body. I'm going to start moving it and press the trigger while I'm moving the can before I even get to the guitar, so that when the paint actually starts hitting the guitar, it's always in motion. When I get past the guitar, then I let up off the trigger. And then I go back, I start moving the can, and I press the trigger before I get there, moving smoothly in a controlled fashion all the way across. And then when I get off the guitar, let go of the trigger. If you have the can in motion before you press the trigger, it's going to really help smooth out that application. The worst thing you can do is actually have it completely still, press the trigger, and even a fraction of a second, and then start moving it. You're going to get a build up of paint in wherever that can was before you started moving it. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is, after you got that kind of motion down, tip number two is paint all of the curved edges first. If you're doing a coat, you want to get a coat over the whole body, start by putting paint on the curves. So you can see the edges of the guitar. So like if you look at it side on, this edge is all curved. Also, in this particular model, I've got this handle in here. So the entire inside of the handle edges is all curved. But when you look at the front is basically flat, and the back is basically flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my coats by trying to lightly cover all of the curves, because I'm gonna have to get in weird angles, and I'm gonna have to make sure that I'm moving all around. And by doing the curves first, if any excess paint kind of does bleed over onto these flat surfaces, by leaving the flat surfaces till last, you're then able to much more easily come back with a smooth coat and kind of help, we're going to sand this after everything's dry, but it'll kind of help just kind of smooth it over in the painting process. So that's tip number two. The last tip just has to do with timing. If you haven't done a lot of painting, the best way to get paints to stick to a surface very tightly are either mechanically or chemically. Mechanical adhesion just means you want to get a surface kind of sanded to a point where on a microscopic level there's just enough surface area for the paint to stick in, which we've done. We've kind of sanded this down to a nice smooth 400 grit finish. But the second way is chemical. So what that means for us today is when I apply my first coat of the primer, it's going to be a nice light coat. It may not even completely cover all the wood. I want to be very gentle with the paint. I'm going to wait 10 minutes. Now 10 minutes is nowhere near enough time for the paint to completely dry. All 10 minutes is going to do is let it start to dry. It's going to be enough time that it gets tacky. It goes from being wet, sloppy wet, to tacky and sticky. So at the end of that 10 minutes, I'm going to come back and start to apply the second coat. That tackiness of the first coat is going to chemically be a great surface to bond the second coat. And then then I'm going to wait 10 minutes, and then when the second coat is done, I'm going to switch over and start my first light coat of top coat. So I'll do about two light coats of primer, maybe two, if I need to, three coats of top coat. But that is going to be my method. Wait 10 minutes in between your coats, and only 10 minutes, so that you can have the maximum tackiness to stick one coat onto the next coat. And then after that, the final thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to get this set up. Once I'm happy with all of the application, I am going to let this body sit for an entire week. I'm not going to disturb it. I'll bring it inside, so it's protected. But by letting it set for an entire week, it's going to let these coats fully dry before I come back with sandpaper to try to work out if a bug lands on it, or if I got some bumps here or there. So that's really all of the tips and tricks for painting. So the next thing you're going to see, I'm going to get this all set up outside, and I'll show you the time-lapse videos of me doing the different coats. And when we come back, it's actually going to be a week later in real time for me, and we'll get this sanded up and show you the finished product. So, all right, I'm going to get to work, and I'll see you back in about a week. Okay, everybody, we are back, and it has been a full week of real time here for me. And I just wanted to show you kind of the finished product. I have just now done a very quick pass. I pulled the body out. It had dried for a full week, like I said, and I did a very quick pass with 400 grit sandpaper over the surface, not because I wanted to get it in any kind of finished state, but I did want to see if the steps we took at the very beginning of this video actually worked. I wanted to see if the grain filling and the careful, application of that made a difference when it came to the paint job. And I've got to say, I am incredibly happy with this. So you can see here, I'm just looking over here, and you'll see, the light will kind of catch weird bumps. I still have a lot of sanding and work to do to get this, but the smoothness and not being able to see any of the pores or the grain of the wood anywhere, even in the handle, all of this stuff is just so much better. This surface is now going to be, when I get done with the sanding, it is going to be a very good vessel for when we put decals on this and when we move on to the next steps. So I know I said it at the top, but if you haven't gone and checked out that previous video where we talk about the downfalls of not doing the grain filling, I highly recommend you doing that, because this is it. We have got ourselves a smooth, good finished product that we'll be able to take on to the next step. So I know it was a long episode, but thank you for watching, and until next time, play on, my friends, play on.